We built something that was built on three main pillars, right? Natural, 100% natural, no sugar and no preservatives.
If you had to know that this will be your end state
Yeah.
and still start again, would you still start?
He had the guts to ask me that question. And I wonder how many women founders don't get invested in because of the fear.
Giving your baby to a new parent because the parent is not capable? Is that the right analogy?
I don't think it's because a parent is not capable. But it is very much giving my baby to another parent. So I left home at the age of 18. And post that, I got an investment banking job in London. I don't have too many responsibilities or financial obligations, right? All the troubles that a startup can and will go through. I think a lot of the problems that people pointed out to me, right, when I was initially talking to people about the idea was, how will you build brand? You didn't have anybody who was doing that. Everything had a minimum of 10% or 20% or sometimes 40% sugar.
Wow.
Right? So we were trying to unjunk the beverage space. It was sort of like handing over something that you've nurtured and nurtured with a lot of love and a lot of passion to somebody else. I wish I had done a little bit more digital when we had first started out. If you don't build the runway, how will the 747 ever land?
So did you ever feel, as a woman co-founder, did you ever feel the discrimination, or you felt that it is slightly tougher for a woman co-founder to build a business?
It is a little bit harder, I think. Our industry again is we work with retail. We're also in a labor-intensive industry, right? We did our own manufacturing. So I think there was certain sort of, again, just social challenges of people seeing a woman in charge and kind of maybe struggling with the concept of it.
When you start a business, it's like raising your own baby. And in our next guest raised her own baby for good 6.5, 7 years, and then handed that baby over to somebody else for the betterment of that baby. It is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Because it can take away a lot of emotional things from you. So our next guest, so this is the story of Anusha, who's the ex-co-founder of Smoodies. She built Smoodies from ground up and then exited that business for the betterment of the brand. So very different podcast, very different story. Let's hear her out. Hi everybody, welcome back to Game Room. Today we have Anusha with us. She is an ex-co-founder of a health beverage based brand named Smoodies. So welcome Anusha, and thanks a lot for taking out time and having a chat with us. So Anusha, what we'll do is that the objective is to cover your entrepreneurial journey and and pre, post, and what are you doing today as well. So just want to understand now that you've sold Smoodies. So how does it feel like? Where are you at as far as your mind space is concerned? And then maybe we'll dwell a little deeper in terms of how did you go about building your business, and and a little bit about your personal life as well, if that's comfortable with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. We've been following your podcast so far, and it's fun. So I'm really glad to be here.
Great.
So yeah, I think it's been coming up to a year since we
Okay.
exited or sold the business to EatFit, and it's been interesting. I think post, right, we spent sort of 4 to 5 months with the EatFit team, ensuring that we were doing a sort of a good transition, a good handover, and sort of setting the brand up for success, sort of within their system as well. And I think over the last few months, of course, I've sort of gotten used to my new state of being. But I think it did come with a healthy dose of empty nest syndrome as well. But yeah, we sold it in December, and around April, May, I actually started working with a business called Pathfinder. So I'm sort of chief business officer there. I've taken over sort of various aspects of the business there.
So Anusha, your I think trajectory as far as life and career has been one of the most idealized one, so to say. You came from a very strong B school, very strong pedigree, education pedigree, and then you did management consulting for some time, and then you started your own business, ran it for a good 6.5, 7 years.
Yeah, 7 years.
And then exited it. So what I want to understand a little bit more into in terms of your background. Where do you come from, and what made you walk that journey towards entrepreneurship? Because it's after having come done management consulting, a lot of people either get into a strategy role with, with a established startup, and so what made you choose a different path altogether?
So I think where some of my slightly different choices have come from is it kind of goes back to what I did post undergrad as well. So I think, as you rightly said, I've had the privilege of sort of having good pedigree, right? And I think a lot of it is just sort of being at the right place at the right time and just getting lucky. But I did. So I went to the London School of Economics for my undergrad, and so I left home at the age of 18. And post that, I got an investment banking job in London. So I did that for a few years, and I think very quickly I realized that finance is not necessarily something I want to spend my life in. Partly because I spent the last few years working across I think 10 different industries, and at the end of those 2 years I could say I could build a financial model in an Excel spreadsheet phenomenally well. um, but I couldn't really tell you more than I didn't have more than finger deep knowledge about how those industries work, and that was just something I felt that I was missing. And I really wanted to explore that. At the same time, I think, so we're talking 2011, when I was toying with sort of coming back to India, or figuring out what my next steps should be. And Flipkart had just started in India, and the startup ecosystem was just about getting started, right? And it just kind of made sense to come back and figure out my career here. Family is very important to me. Absolutely, almost everybody I care about is in Bangalore, and so it was a no-brainer to sort of come back and set up a career here. I came back, and again, like all Indian parents want you to do that MBA and get it out of the way, and I did that, right? So I again got very lucky. I got into IIM Calcutta, and I think somewhere again, when you go to a campus where everybody is sort of grappling with very similar choices, which is how to get the best day zero job, and day zero is consulting or it's banking. I said I've already done banking. Maybe consulting will get me closer to understanding businesses and working with them, understanding them in depth. And again, I think I was fortunate to get the internship from Bain that converted into a job offer. So at some point, I think I went with whatever was being offered, right?
Yeah.
They were not real choices.
Hmm.
The internship made sense, take the consulting internship. When the job offer comes, it's a very difficult, or in one sense, I think I don't even think I decided whether I was going to accept it or not. It was a no-brainer, right? You get the job at Bain, you do it.
Yeah.
And for me, when I joined consulting, I realized again there were a lot of parallels with my time in banking. It's a great job to be in. It's prestigious. You get to, again, you get to work with a variety of industries and clients, but it just wasn't enough. And so I paid off my student loan and said, I think it's time to actually, sort of start up something of my own. Where it also came from was, I took a 6-month break before going to B school as well, right?
Okay.
Between when I moved back from London, and then went to IIM. And in those 6 months, I have a very restless brain, so it's very hard for me to idle. So I ended up doing a lot of research in the food space. I came back with a couple of food allergies myself.
Okay.
So I would walk up and down supermarket shelves looking for products that suited me. And we're talking kind of lactose free, gluten free, those kind of products. And again, back in 2011, 2012, you did not have enough choice on shelf. So I sort of started thinking about the space, but B school happened and it just sort of interrupted that flow of thought. But yeah, I guess somewhere there was always that thought at the back of my mind that this is a space where there's a lot of potential. And so that's really where the decision came from, right? That let's do it, and let's do it when I'm young. I think, again, a lot of my well-wishers, a lot of my advisors sort of said, why don't you wait for a bit, right? Do this for a little bit longer. And my rationale to sort of jump into it very quickly was, if I do it when I'm young, then I have time to make mistakes. I have time to screw up, to pivot, or to restart if I have to, right? Where I don't have too many responsibilities or financial obligations, right? It's very easy uh, to sort of take the brunt of, let's say, a mistake on the business side, without letting it kind of ruin your life, right, or ruin a career. So I started up at the age of 27, and I don't regret it. I think
Wow.
yeah, it was
Okay.
good.
So, when you were starting out, I believe that you had a co-founder at that point in time, or
Yeah.
you started out alone.
I started out alone in 2015. But really speaking, I think my co-founder Dave, he joined me at exactly the right moment, right? So I spent kind of 6 to 8 months just crystallizing what I want to do, how I want to do it. And the moment I had, the moment I was 10% of the way there, I called him
Acha.
and I said, here's what I'm thinking. And I think within 2 days the decision was made, and
Okay.
yeah, and he joined. So he's pretty much been with me from the start. Yeah.
Because what I've seen is that these are two of the most difficult categories. One is food, and the second is D2C. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of brand building involved, right?
Yeah.
So when you were starting out, what kind of apprehensions, if any, which were there, or I mean, what kind of advice you got from other people, and what, why did you have that conviction? Because a lot of us, when we have gone through this journey of having done an investment banking job as well as a consulting job, there is a lot of inertia which gets built, and that worry that what if this does not work out, and when you start, you also don't have answers to all the questions. So what made you what made you have that strong conviction, and how did you go about it?
Um, I, I think a lot of the conviction that I did have likely came from a source of naivety.
Acha.
To be very honest,
Okay.
right? And I think almost every entrepreneur today and especially first time entrepreneurs who start up, uh, have a healthy dose of naivety as well. Because one, I mean, you haven't really done it before, but you kind of almost need it, right, to be able to see past all the troubles that a startup can and will go through. Right. So I think a lot of the problems that people pointed out to me, right, when I was
Sure.
initially talking to people
Sure.
about the idea was, how will you build brand? How will you get into offline retail? Where will you get the money to be able to compete against a Dabur or a Tropicana? And to some extent, I think I do remember largely ignoring it, right? Saying I'll figure it out. Right.
Acha.
I mean, if you asked the Flipkart founders today, I'm sure they had 100 more questions, right? For me, I think where the conviction came from is there's a white space from a consumer angle, and there was, and there is. If you walk down the supermarket shelves of any retailer at the time, right, you would find sugary drinks. You would find, you would find sort of effectively you would not even be able to find a beverage today or back then which adhered to clean label philosophy, right? And for me, I think that's what I was looking for, right? I wanted a brand that I could trust. We built something that was built on three main pillars, right? Natural, 100% natural, no sugar and no preservatives. You would think that's a fairly simple proposition. We really tried hard not to over-engineer the product, but there was absolutely nothing in this space when we got there, right?
Okay.
And consumers were asking for it. So that's really where the conviction came from, right? That if consumers want it, then let's build it, right?
Sure.
And all the supply chain issues and the working capital, and we'll figure those out. We'll sort those out, right? We're smart. We'll manage. Um, and I still think, I think even now, after we've exited the business, I think from a consumer angle, I couldn't have asked for anything more. We had tremendous retention metrics, a lot of consumer love, and I think the product is fantastic.
Sure. Today, being on this health drink or health food topic, now there's sudden influx of so many brands getting into this whole no sugar ice cream category, no sugar beverage category, or for that matter, cake, this cookies, everything. I mean, so there are so many things which are coming up, and I mean, and we also have this conflict at home. So my wife keeps telling me that you keep ordering these so-called healthy stuff. How do you differentiate between what's healthy and what's not? What's just a fad and what's a marketing gimmick versus what's real?
It's an interesting question.
Without naming any brands, but I would love to understand if you have to
Yeah.
differentiate between a fad of versus a real, and
Yeah.
I'm sure there must be real brands out there as well.
Yeah.
How do we go about identifying that?
So I think first and foremost, you have to recognize that health is not binary,
Hmm.
right? So it's very hard, and it's unfair to brands to categorize them as either healthy or not healthy, right? Like for us, what we were trying to solve is, can I just give you a beverage today which does not have sugar in it and does not have preservatives? Why? Because in the beverage space today, or 7 years ago, you didn't have anybody who was doing that. Everything had a minimum of 10% or 20% or sometimes 40% sugar.
Wow.
Right? So we were trying to unjunk the beverage space.
Hmm.
Today you might have somebody creating bars, right, where they are saying, again, I'm going to pull out the sugar, or I'll pull out the refined sugar. I'm going to add date syrup, right? I'm going to add brown sugar instead, or jaggery, or some alternative. You will have a health nut come and say, but this is not as healthy as it could be, right? Or all you did is replace one sugar with another.
Yeah.
But on the margin, it was better. And they're solving something, right? It may end up being a high fat product, but it perhaps is lower on glycemic index. So I think it's a tricky question. There's no real answer to it, but I do think that, and I feel like consumers are getting more and more sort of savvy with how to establish who's doing real work in the space and who's not, right? FSSAI kind of helps with that as well. So there are stringent back label regulations with respect to what claims you can put on the front label and how you support that on the back.
Sure.
So something as simple as, if you are claiming that your product has a superfood, for example, right? Let's say I have amla in a product and you've put that on your front label, you have to declare what percentage of amla you've put on the back. So immediately, if you see that, this brand has put 0.1% of amla and they're making a health claim on it, that is, in one sense, it's misleading the consumer, right? So little things. The other one that's a good way to establish, at least again, composition of what's going into your product is, all ingredients are meant to be declared in decreasing order on the back. So whatever you have first and second on the back label are present in sort of highest
Yeah.
quantities,
Yeah.
right? So you pick up a mainstream bread today of most retailers, and they call them whole wheat bread. What you'll actually see is it's a lot more maida than it is wheat, than it is unprocessed flour, right? And that's your answer, right? You can call it whole wheat flour because there's a certain proportion of whole wheat in there, but the bulk of it will still be very similar to your normal sort of maida bread or your white bread.
Wow.
So the little things really are
Okay.
what you need to look into. I hope one day, I think marketing will get easier for health brands as well,
Yeah.
where they're recognized for the good work that they're doing, but it's tricky today.
Okay, super. So going back to your business, I believe that it came out of passion, right? I mean, it came out of a need for you to start that business. So if you have to, because I believe that 1 year of entrepreneurial, I always say that entrepreneurial journey is almost like 1 year is like dog years. Every year you feel that you have
Right.
learned 10 years, I mean, within that span of 1 year. And I'm sure when you are building a brand ground up, there's a lot of effort which goes into building it. So to begin with, when if somebody today is aspiring to start something of their own, and they have to pick their team, and when I say pick their team, right from founding team, because it's almost impossible to do everything alone, right? So what is the reason why you chose the co-founder? I mean, and what is it that co-founder brought on the table for you? And second, when you were building your team, what is it you looked for from the team?
So my co-founder is actually a batchmate from IIM Calcutta. Not just a batchmate, a very close friend. So his name is Siddharth Deb, and To be honest, I think Dave and I had been talking about startup ideas on campus, right?
Acha.
I can count at least 3 to 4 different ones that we've properly explored together on campus. So to some extent, I think what I was looking for was just somebody who aligns with my personal values, who I know is passionate about building a business, and again, it's just somebody who I can get along with, right? Where I think Dave really fit in beautifully into the picture as well is he's a bit of an engineering nerd as well. So he came in and he picked up the manufacturing and the operations. So we run a we used to run our own manufacturing plant, right? And so one of the sort of issues that we were grappling with when we first got started was how do you get initial scale, and how do you manufacture for small demand? So typically, if you go out into market today and you look for juice manufacturing lines, right? You basically need to pick up lines for a minimum of 500 liters per hour or 1,000 liters per hour.
Wow.
And these are not lines that you can run for an hour and then switch it off, right? You ideally also need to be able to run it for multiple hours or run it for an entire shift. So that's typically demand that you only get at kind of 1 crore a month revenue. Like the first problem that sort of Dave came in and just solved was he fabricated our manufacturing line.
Nice.
From scratch, sat there and said, here are the quality requirements. Here's what we need on heating, on cooling. This is the cost target, because we put in a little bit of our own money to start with before we raise money. We basically built our first manufacturing line ourselves, and that lasted us 2 years
Wow.
before we sort of scaled up and got another line. So I think for me, like Dave had a very complementary skill set with the ability to one kind of not just sort of bring an engineer's mind to it, but run the manufacturing, run the operations, the distribution, and over and above, I think it's very valuable to have a friend in the business, right? Entrepreneurship can be very, very lonely, and I think through all the COVID years and all of that, it's very helpful to have somebody who you know will always have your back, right? When something goes wrong with him or with me, you always know you have backup, right? The business is never alone. The business is always got two people standing there. So
Okay. What should somebody look for from the founding team if they are setting up a business?
I think it really depends on sort of what scale you're at and how fast you want to grow, right? What I really looked for were people who were aligned with the mission. And to some extent, I think just, again, people who I could rely on, right? So I wasn't looking for extremely specific skill sets. But I think part of where that thinking came from was, our capital raising journey was also a little bit gradual. So the way we built our team also had to be in line with how much capital we had. So we hired people who were flexible, right? Who said, I can help you in various aspects of the business, versus saying I need a head of sales in the first year of business, and I need a head of marketing and brand and things like that. And I think where that thinking comes from, and we did that kind of hiring maybe 4 years into the business, 3 or 4 years into the business, when we could afford it, right? And that's when you start thinking more kind of vertical specific, right? Saying, okay, I need somebody now to catapult us to the next phase of growth and things like that. But I think we had very, very low attrition in the business. People who came stuck with us. It was a very sort of nice journey with respect to sort of seeing how our team kind of grew with us. On average, I think at the time of exit, our average tenure with Team Smoodies was 3.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Super. What attributed to it?
I think the way Dave and I built our team was, we wanted to make sure that not only were they helping build our business and sort of grow the business, but we also wanted to make sure that at all points in time they were seeing personal and professional growth, right? So there was a very healthy sort of respect between us that, you're my employee, but you're also my friend, and I want to make sure that it's making sense for you to be here. right? So we've gone out of our way to make sure, and we've crafted roles for people based on their interest, their skill set, and just absolutely made sure that they at all points in time are happy to be here, right? And and that's also why we just had low attrition, right? Like when our door was always open, right? Somebody had an issue, they came in and they talked to us and said, I'm getting bored, I want to do something else, and if you value that person, hey, you bend over backwards to make sure that they stay. Right. So yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why. I mean, it was a very fulfilling journey, also because of that.
So, Anusha, I have a very specific question here because I've seen companies. So, because we hire for so many companies and we speak with so many candidates, and we know of candidates who belong to some very large unicorns. And when we understand the kind of culture which is driven in those unicorns,
Yeah.
it always makes me wonder that how did they become a unicorn with this kind of culture, right? And you think too much niceness is good? Not don't you think that too much niceness or being good is it good for business?
I think too much niceness has to also come, and this is what we did, right? It also has to come with a high bar for performance. So niceness does not excuse somebody not doing their job, right, or not pulling their weight. And that was something that we were very, very careful about, right? So when I say at exit we had low attrition, it's also because those who sort of joined who were perhaps incorrect hires, right, or were just not the right fit, they left very early, right? And to some extent, I think that's what we ended up doing, right? We figured out how to some extent, I think, encourage people who we knew will do well within the system, and those who wouldn't, we would have those candid chats, right, and say it's not working. So it's not about too much niceness without holding people accountable, but it is. I think what people call bad culture is when all you're doing is holding people accountable, right? And you're not either you're not rewarding them for their work, or you're letting them be unseen. So I think that's probably our philosophy, right? And maybe if we had sort of gotten up to unicorn stage, I would have probably maybe struggled with it, right? We never got there, so it's probably easy for me to say it today. But
What is the proudest and the most difficult moment of that journey?
I think the day we decided to sell was the hardest moment,
Acha.
because it came from sort of recognition that it's important for us to sell for the business to prosper and for the team to prosper, and just for what we spent 7 years building, for that to survive and to last, right? And so I think that was probably one of the harder moments to accept.
Can I ask you a very sensitive question on this?
Yeah.
So it's almost, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like giving your baby to a new parent because the parent is not capable. Is that the right analogy?
um, I don't think it's because a parent is not capable,
Huh.
but it is very much giving my baby to another parent. It
Okay.
is. And I think that was the feeling, right?
Acha.
But we were, I think, again, sort of when we did the transition to EatFit, we were given time to spend with their teams. We actually had a business relationship with them prior to the acquisition anyway, so we were very familiar with our brand and our products and our team. Our team had been working with them as we were suppliers to them for a couple of years before the acquisition, so there was some comfort there. But yeah, it was sort of like handing over something that you've nurtured and nurtured with a lot of love and a lot of passion to somebody else, and then stepping out as well, right? And
Yeah.
saying, okay, you're kind of on your own now, and
Yeah.
please take care of it. So yeah, it was hard, but again, I think necessary, right? I mean, entrepreneurship at the end of the day is very personal, but you're running a business, and you have to take objective calls sometimes.
Okay.
So
And what is the proudest moment?
for me, I had obviously we had a lot of big lows, but for me, every moment of pride was just recognition from our consumers, right? Like I was walking through Carbon Park the other day. In fact, that happened post deal, and there's a lady who was doing yoga with a Smoodies bottle next to her.
Oh.
Or if you're just talking to a stranger and I tell them what about the brand that we've built, and they're like, oh yeah, I have your product all the time. For me, I think that those are those moments of pride, and they've been, again, I think, over the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 years, right? When we really started getting good growth and great awareness in market, I started getting more and more of those moments, right, where a stranger on the road, as who was part of my target market, would know who we were. So yeah, I think micro moments of pride really is what we enjoyed.
So there is a reason why I was very keen to. I think we met last year, and I was always. I believe when I met you also at that point in time also, I was very keen to understand about your journey, because day in and day out we keep hearing a lot of entrepreneurs who are still continuously, constantly doing businesses, but there is a lot of learning which we can derive after you have ran. And maybe some people do it with choice, some people do it out because of circumstances, and with you it was the latter.
To some extent, I
Yeah,
think I wasn't forced into it,
yeah, yeah.
right? There was sort of maybe an option to sort of maybe raise a small amount of capital and just sort of keep it going in some way. But pretty much every advisor I had told us that if you can't raise a large amount of capital, you'll not be able to grow this, right? You won't be able to take this to the next phase. And I think we'd been in a little bit of a limbo, again, not with respect to growth, but with respect to capital, for the last sort of almost 2 years. So the pandemic for us was fairly debilitating. Because we don't have a very traditional journey as well, that most D2C brands have, right? Because when we started, it was 2016. The phrase D2C hadn't even been coined back then. So we actually went offline first. And we built our offline, again, it was fairly idealistic, right? Said, I want to succeed in retail because long term you have to succeed in retail. I think everybody knows that today. I knew that back then. And so we started with Bangalore, and we as a brand, we were very well known for having great distribution in retail, right? You could name almost every offline modern trade chain and you would find Smoodies on shelf. So we did that for a few years, and it took a very long time to build out that distribution. We then launched in the Mumbai market. We built that out as well. We were just moving into sort of blockbuster summer in March 2020, and sort of the crash happened, and we lost more than 75% of our revenues within a week, right?
Oh, yeah.
And because all my revenues were coming from offline, it wasn't an option to just wait for the pandemic to resolve, because nobody knew when that was going to happen. So we actually shut down all of our offline channels, and that's when we started the digital pivot. In one sense, I think it was a good move, right? I mean, we grew faster, we were a hell of a lot more capital efficient, but we had to rebuild at that point in time. So I think that period of 1 year where we were rebuilding, it really hurt us with respect to sort of momentum. To some extent, it did hurt the fundraise story as well. And yeah, I think at some point we realized that the business was not being able to attract in the kind of capital that it deserved. And at some point, I think we realized again that for survival, it might make sense to run this business as part of a larger platform. So a platform that already has distribution, where at least certain costs can be cut out, right, from the platform play. So House of Brands became an option. I mean, we talked to a bunch of people as well. EatFit was again a great fit because they already knew us. They knew us very well. They sold the product, so they understood it, and so they understood the potential as well with respect to how much they can grow it. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say I was forced into it. It was a cognitive decision to do it. Was it the way I would have wanted to sort of take the Smoodies brand? Of course not. But it was a good option given my other options.
A lot of brands are now moving from online to offline very, very rampantly, and I've seen a lot of these D2C brands opening their independent stores. How is that more feasible, or how is that good for business? Because I've always thought that it's a more capital intensive approach, right? So what's your take? I mean, you also mentioned that retail is the way to go forward. So why? What is the unit economics to it?
So I think what we saw for our product at least, right, was when you go digital, your unit economics need to make sense right from the start. It's very hard to make those sort of rationalize with time, right? Because everything is variable in nature. So you've got customer acquisition cost, you've got distribution cost, which is usually again in proportion to your sort of AOV, right, your average order value. And what we saw again in 2020 and in 2021 to some extent was a lot of brands were growing very rapidly online because digital marketing was cheap. Over time now, we've seen digital marketing costs sort of ramp up 3x. But the consumer is still not willing to pay 3x of what they used to pay for your products. So, on a unit economics standpoint, now people are finding it very hard to even find a path to profitability if you're only online.
Okay.
Typically, what happens again with retail, for food brands, the grocery stores are a great channel, right? So you don't even need to set up your own retail infrastructure. You sell again on an existing platform. It's expensive sometimes to get in and to sort of to get that shelf space itself. It is expensive to maintain the shelf, right? So you need feet on the street to be able to ensure that you're servicing stores and you're replenishing stock. But long term, that's where the volumes are, right? Because that's where your shoppers are.
Yeah.
And when you really look at the real India today, especially again in food and grocery, you cannot ignore kirana, you cannot ignore retail, right? When you see brands moving to retail after sort of a couple of years in their journey, I think it's a very natural. It's a very natural way to go. I think a lot of people look at it and they laugh, say, well, you couldn't make it online, but that's really not true, right? I think people realize that it's cheaper to build your brand online to start with. But a lot of founders today are very cognizant right up front, right? That at some point we will hit retail because that's where the volume is. But to build a brand to start with in retail is very challenging. And I did it, right? I wish I had done a little bit more digital when we had first started out. But if you have a shelf with let's say 20 different juice brands and I put a Smoodies bottle there, you've never seen it before. Chances are you're not going to notice it. Right? But if I put a beautiful glossy video on your Instagram feed, you might actually watch it.
Yeah.
So it is cheaper for me to get your attention the first time round. But it'll be more expensive for me to get you to buy it online.
Yeah.
And possibly if you've seen it online once and then you walk into store and you say, this brand looks familiar, you might very well pick it up.
Correct.
So that's really, I think, in my opinion, I think startups need to really sort of straddle both, right? You have to find a balance between spending online, getting brand awareness online, and ensuring that your offline channel is where your product moves.
Last question before we move to the penultimate question, let me put it this way. So, if you have to look back at your journey, and it's always smarter to look back rather than, because I personally feel that you take decisions or make choices basis whatever you know at that point in time.
Yeah.
But if you had to rewind back and ask that Anusha 7-8 years back that what she could have done differently, what would that be? And if an entrepreneur has to come today in front of you and say that what kind of learnings they can derive from your journey, what would those be?
So I think there's this gyan that an investor had given me once. Um, and I remember sort of going back and thinking on it. And he said very simple, right? He said, if you don't build the runway, how will the 747 ever land? Right? And he said this because I think he was effectively what he was trying to tell us is you're not being ambitious enough, right? And I think that's possibly one of the mistakes that we made, right? We wanted to build a very large business, but we didn't raise enough capital for it upfront. Right. Today, for example, you see seed rounds of a minimum of 2 million. Right.
Yeah.
Most people start with a lot more capital. It gives you that buffer to build systems, to build the runway, right? To build the business in the way it needs to, so that you're ready for growth. Right. I think we did it we sort of did it a little bit more slowly and steadily in one sense, right? So we said we're just going to raise enough capital to be able to figure out the market, figure out the next 18 months, then we'll raise again. I think that was possibly I don't know if we'll call it a mistake, but it handicapped us, right? Because we didn't have buffer to be able to make a few mistakes and then still sort of continue on unscathed. So that was one. You know, while we did do a offline to online kind of pivot, I think there were a few moments. Again, this is in 2020, right, when a lot of changes were happening for us as well in the business. There were a few moments where I did find myself thinking, should we be looking at a slightly different product play itself, right? We've got a great brand and people know it. But if we are doing the digital pivot, I did find myself thinking, is there a range of products that we can launch which are more online friendly as well? There was fear again to some extent that we don't have the capital to do it. And you know, I see entrepreneurs today making bets all the time, right? They say ki, it's okay, you know, we'll figure it out. We'll make a big bet. If it doesn't work out, we'll deal with the consequences then. And so for me now, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I wonder like if I'd actually sort of tweaked the product or just launched a slightly wider range of products and sort of built my own platform play. I think that could have been something that could have played out well. So in one sense, I think the learning is listen to your gut. Right? I was also the kind of, or I am the kind of person who I listen to a lot of advisors. I do.
Okay.
I have a sort of a panel of people that I talk to, and somehow my gut was saying one thing, but everybody else was saying something else, and I went with what everyone else was saying. Maybe that's something that I would probably change.
Okay.
Yeah.
And similar, your advice will be similar to those people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did you ever feel, as a woman co-founder, I mean, did you ever feel the discrimination, or you felt that it is slightly tougher for a woman co-founder to build a business?
It is a little bit harder, I think. You know, our industry again is we work with retail. We're also in a labor-intensive industry, right? We did our own manufacturing, so I think there was certain sort of again just social challenges of people seeing a woman in charge, and kind of maybe struggling with the concept of it. Again, in one sense, because I had sort of Dave to run this business with, a lot of that got alleviated as well, right? But it is very, I think at times it's very irritating to have to deal with.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think what also comes with pedigree is the maybe confidence to be able to say it doesn't matter, right? Even if there is some discrimination, I'm certainly not the person who should be shouting off the rooftops about it, right? I should
Correct.
just figure it out
Yeah.
and move on from there, right? And you find yourself wondering actually that hey, you know, like I walked into an investor meeting once, and you know, they didn't invest finally, but you know, this went all the way to the IC round. So Dave and I were there together, and we were pitching, and you know, this investor sort of kicked everybody else out of the room and asked me. You know, I just want to know because you know when we invest in businesses, obviously we want our founders to be 100% dedicated to their businesses. So just want to make sure that you know where are you with respect to your personal priorities. And you know Dave was sitting next to me and he looked straight at me and asked me that question. And you know half of me wanted to get up and say, I don't want to answer that question for you.
Yeah.
And then the other half was saying, I'm kind of responsible for this business, and if this investor does want to give me a check, then I most certainly should not react to this question. And it's been a few years since that conversation, but it always bothers me, right? Because I'm saying he had the guts to ask me that question. And I wonder how many women founders don't get invested in because of the fear of somebody just not being able to, let's say, manage, right? Like
Yeah.
work-life balance and things like that. And I think it would be unfair of me to say that my life has been sort of considerably harder because I'm a woman. I was very fortunate to have a co-founder who's just incredibly supportive, incredibly fair, right? I don't think between us we've ever really sort of had any issues, and that helps. And again, I think what happens with women who are sort of running their own businesses, they also end up getting very, very busy, which means you do need to have support from people at home who should not have inordinate expectations of you sort of being disproportionately responsible for, let's say, household chores and also being responsible for your business. Again, I'm very lucky to have family that says, you do what you have to do. Right?
Wow. Nice.
So yeah, I think I come from a place of privilege when it comes to that. So
So Anusha's opinion of herself before Smoothies and after Smoothies, has it changed or it has remained the same? Or has it made you stronger?
it's definitely made me stronger. Um, I think who I was before Smoothies, I don't know who I was before Smoothies. I think when I quit to start up, that was probably the first big decision I had made for myself, against everybody else's advice. Right? I feel like anything that happened to me pre Smoothies, it happened to me. I didn't make it happen. Right? I got into a great college, so you go. It wasn't it's not a choice, right? You get in somewhere and you go. You get the job, you do it. You, in one sense, I think those choices are very easy because they're very conventional choices as well, right? So I really learned a lot more about myself and what's important and what makes me tick post Smoothies or during this journey. So yeah, I think I'm a better person for it.
Super.
I've also discovered that I love the journey so much that I think I want to do it again. Right?
Wow.
So
In spite of no, so this would have been my question that if you had to know that this will be your end state
yeah,
and still start again, would you still start?
I would do it differently,
Huh.
but I would start.
You will
I
start.
would start. I
Okay.
have no regrets.
What next for you?
Well, I'm currently learning and doing at Pathfinder,
Huh.
so that's been really fun,
Hmm.
and I think I'll stay for as long as it makes sense for me and for them.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think at some point possibly start up again, or I've discovered my love for the startup ecosystem, right? So in some shape or form, I want to stay in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Great. Thanks a lot, Anusha. I think to summarize our conversation, I believe that these are, for me personally, these are some of the learnings which is also very, very critical. Because as I said, that when you are forever, and I'm sure every startup goes through their own ups and highs and lows as well. But there's a lot of learning which we can derive in terms of what you mentioned. There are a lot of times when we are faced with that dilemma between logic versus emotion, and you spoke about following your gut feel, and most of the time we underestimate ourselves, right? So that is one thing which I am taking away from this conversation, and loved your resilience, loved the fact that having seen through so much, you are sitting here strong, and and being able to share that whole journey with us. Thanks a lot for trusting us to do that. And any final thoughts which you want to leave us with?
Um, no, I think it's been very nice to have this conversation and to sort of relive, the last few years as well. I think, to anybody who's watching this, who's thinking about starting up or is sort of just getting started with their journey, I think it will always be rewarding, even if even if it's financially not rewarding, or even if it's very hard along the way. At some point you will realize how much starting up can adds value to your life, and so I would always encourage somebody to think about it and not do it out of fear.
Exactly. And I will quickly, cheaply plug in my YouTube Giri, wherein I would request everyone whoever is watching it to if you want to see more such stories, and if you feel that there's any kind of impact which these stories can put, and others can benefit from it as well, request you to kindly subscribe to our channel, Game Room, and please like, share, comment, so that this such kind of stories can reach out to as many people as possible. And thanks a lot, Anusha. It
Thank
was
you.
great catching up with you.
Thanks for having me.